Hello, I'm Somi Arian. I'm the founder of FemPeak, a platform where visionary women come to gain live access to global leaders, learn about the macroeconomic landscape, and stay ahead of the curve. In today's podcast, I speak with Karen Laos, a communication coach and educator who primarily works with women to ensure they succeed in their careers and reach their peak potential. Karen was first a guest speaker on FemPeak, where she spoke about 5 ways that women give up power and how to get it back. Her talk stood out to me, and I thought I should definitely interview her for this podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. So, you were one of our guests. Obviously, you were with Professor Seeger. You did this really amazing session together, and you talked about the fact that there are 5 reasons why women, or there are 5 ways that women give up power, and what to do about it. So I thought a good place to start, because during the session there's Q&A, etc. So I didn't quite pick up exactly what the 5 were, and I thought it might be a good way to start the conversation today, to kind of say, like, can you talk me through those 5 reasons, and how do you define, like, if you were saying, like, number 1 this, number 2 this, that would be a good place to start, and then we can kind of go back and look at each of them in more depth. So in your opinion, when you look at how women give up power, how would you count those?
Sure. Yeah. Well, and it's funny you say that, because I feel like there's multiple ways. There's definitely more than 5. And I don't necessarily have like, oh, here's the top 5. It's more of the ones that have shown up for me that I have really powerful stories around. And for example, I'd say one of the major ones is that how we undervalue ourselves. So that's one of them. So the other thing that I want to say, I love that this is a conversation that people could be eavesdropping on, because
Yes.
we'll make it particularly authentic, because I might say one that might be a little bit different sometimes. Like, oh, this one just came up this week, for example. But I do see some very common themes. So the undervaluing, would you rather have me go through a few
Yeah,
first?
let's go through the 5. Tell me the
Okay,
5 that
just
really
quickly.
stand out for you.
Okay,
because
yeah.
because I was thinking of it in terms of, like, for example, one is in your posture, one is in your voice, like, is that
Oh,
how one way of seeing it? Or but okay, but you're coming at a different angle. And as you say, I think there are so many different ways of looking at it. So let's go with the ones that you mentioned. So undervaluing
okay.
is one.
Sure.
Yes.
Yep.
And actually such a good moment for you to mention that, because tomorrow we're filming at Royal Albert Hall for the my other company,
Yeah.
and the team are going there to film. And one of the artists who is going to be playing there, a female artist, international concert pianist. And I was talking to somebody who knows her, and we were talking about the pricing and how these artists price themselves. If you see the difference between um, the way that the male artists price themselves, sell themselves, and women, female artists, very, very stark difference. They really, it's like the big star of the show is not the woman.
I want to see a woman being, first of all, considered to be the star of the show in situations like that. And I would like to see women really valuing themselves more. And it's all about positioning. It's not about your gender. I know that our gender a lot of times doesn't and doesn't help, in situations like that, because historically women have not been the uh, gender that have been considered for these things. And in some areas, such as in probably music and arts, this is even a bigger gap, because they haven't quite heard of diversity yet.
Yeah.
But
Believe me.
yeah, but ultimately, I think it comes down to positioning. I have a belief that right is not something that's given to you; it's something that you take,
Mm,
because
mm.
because
It's so
nobody's going to
true.
say, let me put it on a platter and give it to you. Nobody's going to do that.
Exactly. I was just talking to a friend about this the other day related to you have to advocate for yourself. We were talking about doctor's appointments and things where people are not paying attention to help you. And it's so true. I love what you said. You have to take it. And we have to get comfortable with building that muscle, because that's the other thing that I noticed, particularly as women, is that we won't speak up. We'll hold back from sharing our ideas. And that's really what my whole message is all about, that we hold back and we hesitate. We are so busy. And this, now I'm getting kind of, I'm mixing
Okay, so
up.
undervalue,
So
hold
undervalue.
back.
And then I didn't have hold back as one in and of itself, although that is very true. But one of them is also we're hesitant to self-promote.
So lack of self-advocacy.
Yes. And then I was just starting to bring up one of the other ones is that we're always looking to accommodate everyone else, as opposed to looking at what we need, what we want.
I even do it to my cat. Like,
Tell
honestly,
me
I
more about that.
kitten. I have this kitten, right? I put his needs behind, ahead of me. I'm like, that it's probably because he's my only family. Yeah, but it's like, you know what I mean? And I'm now in this weird situation where, so I've never had a very close relationship with my family back home, but I support them. Financially, etc. But we have a very convoluted relationship with my mother. She doesn't really understand what I'm doing, and she has never been there for me, when I was growing up. So we had a very complicated relationship. She both of them, my dad and my mother, and they're religious. I'm an atheist, all of those things. I just sort of turned my back to religion. And my mom said, I regret the day that you learned English, because that changed you. So all of those things are, they kind of stay with you, right? So there's all of those things, but still, when they ask me for something, there are many times where I have really gone out of my way to help them. Even though I truly don't have the bandwidth, sometimes, I really have to push myself financially, time-wise, etc. So we put ourselves ahead of everybody. We feel like the world is on our shoulder, that everybody, why is it? We have this sense of responsibility. And I have to remind myself time and again that I'm not responsible for other people, right? That you're not responsible. Like, everybody is responsible for themselves. They make the choices that they made. They have to see the consequences, and it's not our job to fix everything for everybody. And as I'm getting more and more successful, the expectations of people around me becomes more, and then I have to kind of train myself to say that there has to be a boundary, and there has to be times, and sometimes they may not understand why I say no, but I know why I'm saying no. I know that in the long run, this is the right decision. At least for me, it's the right decision. Okay, so that's another muscle that we need to develop.
Well, and to your point about that I want to remind everybody that no is a complete sentence.
Yeah, I love that. No is a complete sentence. I really love it. This is going to go on it needs to be on a t-shirt. Let's create some.
I agree. Well, and it's so often, especially as women, we feel like we need to explain everything. Well, the reason why, and as opposed to just saying, no, thank you, I'll pass. I've gotten really good at saying I'll pass. I feel like that's a little softer. Like, I'll say no, but then I'll say I'll pass. So let's see. All right. I have 3.
Undervalue, hesitant to self-promote, always accommodate everybody.
And then we speak softly or tentatively. We speak tentatively would probably be how to say it. And that's when I get more into the actual mechanics around our voice, speaking with projection, having conviction in our voice versus a question mark.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I had a client here yesterday, and we were talking about this. I said, you speak with your head voice too much. I was like, bring it down a little bit. So when I'm talking to investors, I speak from my gut. When I'm talking to corporations, I speak with my chest, and when I'm speaking to people, like to my cat, I speak with my head, like, hey, baby. That's like the head voice, right? And then this is like chest, corporations, clients, friends, family.
Right.
Most of the time you're in chest here.
Yeah.
And then there are times where, like, when you want to be really taken seriously, talking to investors, talking to, like giving a talk, etc., that's where you go to your gut, you speak from your,
Exactly.
right?
I love how you are so aware of the differences.
Because I was a singer in a heavy metal, death metal band.
Oh, no way. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. Yeah. So
I
you know
played
all
to
the
like
lingo.
2,000 people, etc. Yeah, so I had to learn to kind of sing. Well, I wasn't singing, I was a screamer.
Oh
So
my
like a
gosh.
growling. So I learned all of those things, and to this day, it's such a great concept. I really think if we teach young girls at school about these things, like, when you want to be taken seriously, when you are, in a position where you're negotiating, asking, that kind of thing, you speak with your gut, you speak from here. When you're, with your friends, your people that you want to connect with, you're in your chest. But then when you're in, like, a mode of, like, really, you make yourself vulnerable. So here we are vulnerable, here we are equal, here we are dominant.
That's awesome. I love how you separate that. Oh my gosh. That's really, really
And it
great.
just came to me now, this dominant thing. It's just
I
like
love
sometimes
that.
you're
Yeah.
explaining, sometimes you're explaining something, and I love metaphors, and I think that it
Mhm.
really helps. And it's like about imagining also, where do you feel like. I have a really good friend and client, and one of our Shapanis and investors. Her name is Sarah Monroe. You might know her. She's written the book The Shed Method, published by Penguin. She's
Oh,
really, really, really amazing. She's a great coach, and she always talks about. She's like, whenever I'm talking to her about being under stress, or like pressure, etc., she says, "Tell me, where do you feel it?" Because having that awareness of where do you feel that
yes.
pressure, pain, right? And based on that, then you can start to tackle it. That's like the body
Yeah.
awareness, right?
So
And I think
good.
it really helps, right? So when we
Very
talk
much.
about women speak tentatively, I think that's kind of like, for me, it's a feeling of not being sure, whether it's usually between here and here, and they're not sure. It's kind of oscillating. They're not talking with definiteness about, like, they're not clear about their position. Would you say
Well,
that's true?
yeah.
Like,
Well, I want to separate. So, yes, if I'm understanding you correctly. And then one of the other ones, so with the speaking tentatively, that's really more about the voice itself. And maybe that's what you're saying, but it sounds like you might be getting a little bit to the message, or maybe I'm
what I'm
not.
thinking about is, because to me, correct me if I'm wrong, because English is not my first language. When you say tentatively, it means unsure. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hesitant.
And when I
Yes.
say, yeah, hesitant. So to me, you are unsure when you're not clear about, in a dialogue, there are three positions: either you're dominant, or you're equal, or you're right, submissive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to me, tentative is when you're not sure where you stand, and often it's a question of, am I submitting or am I equal? It's very rarely even a question, because if you were questioning whether you're dominant, you were already in a better position. But if it's a question of, am I submitting here, or am I being treated as an equal? And because it's a question rather than saying I am being, like, the tentativeness
Yes.
comes from not being clear. If you go into a conversation knowing with clarity, we are talking as equals, like here now we are talking as equals, then when I'm talking to an investor, I need to be clear about what's the situation and what do I do. I make sure to put myself in the dominant position, and I'm like, I'm a prize to be won, right? And I'm willing to walk away. Like you're an investor. There are many investors. There's only one Somi. You know what I mean? Like if you make that to yourself, clear to yourself, right? And you go into that conversation with the and then there are times that doesn't work, and because the other person, because you never know where the other person, but on the whole, I would say in almost 90% of the time that works, because you come in with, because that's what they want to see. Actually, they want to see somebody who has conviction in themselves, right? And then occasionally it doesn't work. And actually I had a very bad experience after the one that I told you in the session. Right? I had another really bad one, which was a woman actually, and and she just completely threw me off, because she just came in with like she was late, and she was on her phone. It was like, it was, and she kept interrupting all that stuff. But those are rare. Most of the time, I'd say 90%, like 9 out of 10 of my conversations are fine, because I come into them not tentatively but definitely. So would you say that the opposite of tentative is definite, where you're clarity?
Yes, I would. And I want to expand, because one other of these is related to the actual content. So that's what I call, we ramble and give too much detail.
Like I just did.
No.
No, but I didn't mean to ramble. I was just trying to figure out.
You weren't rambling. I'm fascinated by this, because we're talking at a depth that most people don't really get. And so it's so interesting to hear all of your, like, just the nuances that you're talking about. And it's fascinating to me. And even just as you were talking about clarity, like definite versus tentative. And I think that one thing is with the voice, when I'm talking about tentative or hesitant, I'm talking about the actual vocal, like how you sound vocally. And it does definitely relate to, are you definite or not? But the other fascinating thing is that, at least from what I learned as a kid, is the fake it till you make it concept, that you might not know everything about. Like back in the day, I sold makeup, and they said, you're never going to know every single thing about every product, but you have to act as if you do. So I was definite in the way that I spoke, but I didn't necessarily have a lot of confidence around what I was selling, because I knew it 80%. So it's also interesting to me that, because I think a lot of people think, well, and the reasons why in general, one of the reasons that women are hesitant to self-promote is they feel like, well, I have to have 10 out of 10 qualifications to be able to apply to this role. And yet, if we can come across with confidence and we have 7 out of 10, then if we come across as definite and with conviction, then we don't necessarily have to have the exact 10 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly.
So I find it fascinating. Yeah.
So I guess for me, that comes from, I wrote this book, actually it's behind me, that one, blue one. It's called Career Fear and How to Beat It, not feed it, beat it. I guess I'm thinking about feeding the cat. So Career Fear and How to Beat It. Definitely don't feed the fear. And there's a chapter in it called Knowing Yourself. And I think what I was talking about with the tentative, definite, etc., it comes back to this concept of knowing yourself, because if you I guess I've studied myself so well, and I've always tried to really since I was 4 or 5 years old, I remember always asking, who am I? you know. Like I used to look at myself in the mirror for ages and thinking like, who am I? Like, why am I here? What is this? Why do I have feeling and senses? And you know, so it was
Wow.
fascinating. So that sort of became a source of knowledge in a way, and I kind of felt like I could just learn. I remember, being in Iran, because I grew up in Iran. Being in Iran, the chances of you ending up in jail is pretty high, especially, it's a bit like being in North Korea, right? So if you're not, I became an atheist at, pretty young age. And when you live in a place like that, I kind of resort myself to the idea that it's quite possible that I might end up in jail. And I thought that, you know what, even if I end up in jail, I could be just in one room alone with no book, and I could still grow, because I could feel that I could just sit and think and find ideas grow, like fine. So a lot
Wow.
of these things that I talk about are not things that I've read anywhere. They're
Yeah.
just a result of observation. I really think that we can learn so much by just observing. And if I
Yeah.
could teach young people one thing, like children, we are taking away the ability to observe with our educational system. And with young women, young girls growing up, if they learn to observe and question, they can find things about themselves. I remember, like, growing up in Iran, I remember thinking like, I can move a mountain, which is funny. Now we have FemPeak, which is all about mountaineering. I can move a mountain, I can do anything. Like, where did I get that confidence? My parents told me in our culture, it was like, a woman's laughter should not be heard. So
Wow.
you're not supposed to be heard laughing. So how do you go from being in that kind of oppressive society to then saying, you know what, I'm gonna learn everything that there is about finding the power to get myself out of that situation, to do the things I want to do, to change the world, to change the the situation better for women, for anybody who is oppressed. So I to that's why I think that everything, all the power is here. It's inside us. Again, it's in your gut, it's in your heart, or it's in your head. Wherever. It's always these three things, right? Like, and the power is there. You just need to tap into it.
Yes.
So,
So true.
so okay, so I don't know why we got there. It just sort of went there.
Okay, I love this. You and I have so much in common. I mean, I was always obsessed with personal growth ever since I was a kid. Like, why do people do the things that they do? And that's why I got a psych degree. And yeah, it's just fascinating to hear you talk about it from your experience.
Yeah, I guess, and I'm a living example of, if I show you a picture of where I was born, you'll never believe where I've gotten, right? And I just wanted to kind of set an example that it really doesn't matter where you're born, or where you are brought up, what gender you are. It doesn't matter. Everything that you think is a negative to you, it can be positive. You just
Yes.
have to see it that way.
So
Everything that you think is, my accent. So many people laughed, especially Iranians. Once I started putting content on online, I had a lot of Iranians, especially, commenting, "Oh, like her accent. Look at her Persian accent." And I was like, and they were like, "Oh yeah, you might want to practice losing your accent." And I said, "You know what? Actually, I don't want to lose my accent, because my accent
oh,
shows that I am an immigrant, and that's it's part of my branding." I used to say the
yes.
other thing, like people said,
Yes.
like, you have one eyebrow, it's like your eyebrows are different. I'm like, well, it's part of my branding. I'm like,
Oh my gosh. I can't believe the things people say.
I know,
Ah,
and as women, we get judged, right?
yes. Yes.
If you are a man posting content, nobody gives a shit about your eyebrows. You know,
Exactly. Oh my gosh.
it's crazy. Like, you know, if you're, it's there's always something. People are always going to make a comment, right? So
Yeah.
I would say one of those things, one of the ways that we give up power, maybe we should add this, you know, number 6, is that we give into, not give into is not the right word, but we put too much, we give too much weight to how people judge us.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
You know, we overthink it, we think about it too much.
Exactly.
We're like, you know, like so and so. I used to, in the beginning, it used to bother me. And they said your voice is shaky. They said your eyebrows don't match. They said you have an accent. And you know what? After a while, I was like, you know, I don't care that my voice is shaky. I am nervous because I've just started speaking. You know, that early days when, you know, like,
Yes.
you know, I have the courage to get up and speak. And I used to say to them, I used to reply. I got a lot of these on LinkedIn and things like that. I used to say that I'm not a presenter. I'm somebody with knowledge that is sharing her knowledge. So you shouldn't care, and you shouldn't be worried about the way that I speak. You should really pay attention to what I say. And if you pay attention to what I say, I'm solving a problem for businesses. You know, at the time I used to talk about millennials and marketing to millennials and things like that. And to have the courage to say that to people, and then if a lot of people would respond and say, okay, got it, you know, understand. And after a while, I decided I'm not going to even reply. I just don't have time. I'm just like, I'm going to leave it, right? And I know that I'm doing it. You know, I know that if you want to learn public speaking, the only way to do it is by public speaking. There's no amount. There's no amount of practice in front of the mirror that would help you overcome the nerves of when you stand on stage. I've done it as a singer. I've done it as a speaker. You just have to keep doing it until you get comfortable with it, and you have to be okay with people laughing at you, with people, you know, hearing the shakiness in your voice. Just say it is what it is. I have to do it until I get used to it, until I get ready and comfortable.
Exactly.
So you give up power by caring about what people say. Right. So that's another one. Okay. So did I miss? So there was the voice, and then there was the content, you said.
Oh yeah, we give too much detail and don't get to the point.
Get to too much detail. Yes.
Yeah.
Every time you say that, I realize I'm doing that. Okay. In this conversation. Also, I find that when I'm very tired, I talk more, and I am very tired.
Oh.
You know,
well, the good news is you're very interesting. So.
Oh, thank you.
It's fascinating. No, I'm really enjoying the conversation, and it's so fascinating to hear your perspective as well.
Imagine if you weren't enjoying the conversation either. And I kept talking so much. So yeah, it's part of the charm.
I love it.
Okay.
One other, well, because technically I have 7. That's my typical talk. 7.
Okay.
But the one other I think we haven't covered is we use minimizing language.
Yeah, a little, just, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So how do you so I learned about that from a guy called Julian Treasure.
Okay.
He's given a TED talk. It's called How to Be, and he's written a book on how to be heard. That's the title of, I actually think I have it somewhere there. And it's a very, very good book. And one of the things that he talks about, he's got a whole chapter on these minimizing words. He doesn't say that women use it more, but after listening to you, I realized that women do use it more. So he's like, don't use things like just and little, and I think, you know, like and correct me if I'm wrong, you know, that kind of thing, right? That we and it took me a while just reading that book. Every time I talk now, I try to remember, you know, not to use those words unless it's really necessary. And even in emails, I used to say,
Yes.
hey, so and so, I just wanted to catch up with you. I don't say I just wanted to catch up with you anymore. I just say, now I say, I wanted to catch up with you,
Yes.
checking in with you.
Exactly.
Hi, so and so, checking in with you to see how you're getting on. Right?
Yep.
Not I hate just checking in with you, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So important. So
Yeah.
important.
So, but
Yeah.
how do you get rid of that habit?
Well, I always recommend no matter what, you start recording yourself in any
Mm,
situation anytime you can. But email is a really good place to start.
yes.
Go back and review your emails, edit your emails. Most of us say things like we say too much, I think, and there's a time and a place to say I think when somebody's asking your opinion,
Yeah.
but too often we use it like or words like
As a
maybe,
filler word.
yeah, maybe, kinda, sorta, like you said, little, just, for example, anyway, I'm getting into, we all know the examples. I don't need
Yeah,
to
yeah,
give
yeah.
more of those. But the how to change it is start noticing. The first thing is just simply self-awareness, kind of like what you've modeled your whole life.
Yeah.
You've been a studier of yourself, of personal growth, a student of that. And I would say be a student of yourself. That's what my suggestion would be for everybody that's listening, and start noticing. But half the time we don't know we're doing these things until we hear it ourselves through a recording, or we get feedback from other people.
Yeah.
So those are the two ways that I would suggest it. And with the feedback from others, you've also got to be specific, because most people don't want to just randomly give you feedback. But if you say, I'm working on language that might be minimizing, or it's things like just, whatever you think you tend to say a lot, or maybe you just don't know. So then you could ask somebody, and obviously you've got to ask somebody that you trust. Can you notice if there's any words that I am saying that are taking
So
away from the meaning?
that's right. Yeah. So one of the ways that might be helpful, if I mention it, is one of the ways that I overcame it was allowing myself to have a pause, to telling myself it's okay to have a pause. People will
Mhm.
forgive you for that. And they, rather than I try to, rather than say or I think or and things like that,
Yep.
I try to, like this, right? It's okay to have that moment of a pause, right? Say, I try to think about what am I really saying, and saying to myself that it's okay to have a small pause.
Mhm. Mhm.
So because
Absolutely.
actually having a little pause helps you being heard more easily, gives the other person a moment to um, absorb. For me, it happens quite a lot because English is not my first language, and I learned English. By the time I started learning it when I was 10, which is already too late. And I was in Iran, right? And actually, I left Iran when I was 23. So I really learned it mainly as an adult, properly. So there are many times, and especially when I'm tired, it gets harder to kind of remember words. So instead of using those filler words, I thought to myself, it's actually okay to have a pause, and it actually helps you being taken more seriously sometimes as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I talk a lot about that when I'm talking about voice, because pausing is directly linked to credibility.
Yes.
Because if you come across as in control, and usually when somebody's talking so fast, you feel like they're nervous or they're not in control. And so when we do those pauses, it does make a tremendous difference. And people feel like, oh, this person is taking me somewhere. They're a leader. There's all these things that people think about just by that small thing, which is the
Mm,
pause, like you said.
yeah.
And I I'd say be mindful once again of filler words. And half the time, this is where I go back to recording and getting feedback from others, because I remember one of my very first talks was, yeah, it was, I don't remember where it was. Anyway, it was a couple hundred people. I was really proud of how I did. And I got a lot of compliments, which was great. But when I listened to the recording, I noticed that in 15 minutes, I had said, 41 times.
Yeah.
And I was so surprised.
I did that as well. Yeah, it's so hard to, I'm so lucky because I'm a filmmaker. So I've always had somebody with me filming whenever I was talking. And then when we were editing it, I was like, oh my God, I'm so bad. So bad. And we were like cleaning, like we were cutting every 30 seconds, we were cutting something out. And 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 it can still happen depending on it happens a lot less, but it can happen. And
Yes.
especially if you're tired, if you're talking about a new subject area that you're not used to, it can happen. But it's okay to allow ourselves to have that pause, and it does really help. The other thing you mentioned, mindful, one of the things, there's a whole chapter on mindfulness in my book, and I think that you can really use this. I think there's a real opportunity to use it as a mindfulness practice, because you can use it as a way to say, you know what, I'm gonna really listen to myself, right? And by listening to myself, I start to become aware of the way that I speak and the things that I say. And that really helps.
Yeah.
It's one of the best mindfulness exercises.
That's so good. Yeah.
Right?
It's so good. Well, and you made me think too, as you were talking about one of my clients about 6 months ago, said she's the head of a nonprofit organization. So she's fundraising all the time. She's in front of her board. And she said that she has this tendency to immediately react when people say something and to start speaking, but then she rambles. So she said, I need something to help me with that.
Mindfulness.
So yeah. So we came up with stop, pause, breathe. And that's what she says to herself before she makes a comment. Stop, pause, breathe. Then she'll comment. And she said it's helped her tremendously.
Yeah.
So
And one of the things that I would do if I was in her position, because it happens to me a lot, where if I'm giving a talk and people ask a question, and there are times that I'm like really like, as they're speaking, I'm like listening, like looking down, I'm like listening. And then when they finish for a moment, I just don't bring my head up. I continue to look down. And it creates a sense of intrigue as well. But it's because genuinely I'm thinking. And then I come back and say, this is interesting, and then like it's good because it's like, oh, she's got something very important to say. And then I'm like, and usually, I do, but then I say, let me see if I can help you rephrase that, or let me see if I can help you rethink the way that you see this, and that really like throws a person and in a good way, and it actually makes something. But that shows that you're really connecting with the person. You're taking them even more seriously by trying to understand where they're coming from. And sometimes it helps to say, let me repeat that back to you and see if I got it right. Like these kinds of things, they can help, because sometimes it could be that in the process of asking, let me repeat it back to you, that you're buying yourself time to think more. And also you want to then make sure that you are indeed understanding where they're coming from, so it deepens the conversation. So these are little techniques that, again, I learned mostly from experience, which was like, it's important to not to feel like I have to give an answer to everything. It's more important to make the other person feel that they're being heard.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the marker of a good dialogue. And it really is a great mindfulness practice as well. Because, I always say in the book, I talk about my definition of mindfulness is active participation rather than being a passive observer. That's what I mean, right? Like you're actively participating in everything that you're co-creating your reality with the world. So I don't believe that we have complete free will, but I also don't believe that we have no free will. We are co-creating our reality with the universe. I believe that we are bundles of probability. I'm a big fan of physics, probability theory, all those good things. And essentially, I see that we are bundles of probability, like these little bubbles that come out, and these
That's so
bubbles,
cool.
some bubbles are bigger, some bubbles are smaller, some bubbles burst faster. Depends on what other bubbles are around them, and there's all those things, right? And you could be, and your entire life experience is like a little bubble. And how can you make it more meaningful, right?
So cool. I love that analogy.
And it just makes because since I was a child, I always, when I asked why am I here, the whole point was like, I just wanted to understand what's the meaning of this life, what's the point of this life, right? And eventually I came to the conclusion that the meaning of life is the experiences that we create, and we are like those bubbles, like like a bundle of probability, with all these
I talk a lot about possibility, so I love that. Probably, like what is possible, and that there's infinite possibilities for you to.
And it's so fascinating. I'm a true believer that the power of imagination is so fascinating. In my life, everything I have imagined has happened. Everything. Like if you see a picture of like my house, these colors, my best friend will tell you, before I left Iran, I was describing to her exactly the kind of color scheme that I want for my house, and the way that I wanted my life to be, all those, like I'm on a top floor of a tall building, and the view that I have, like everything that I thought about has happened exactly. And I remember like thinking about, I wanted to go to New York, and the way I wanted things to happen. And then when I came to the UK, 2005, I came to the UK. 2006, I got invited to the United States by the US State Department, where they paid for my trip for 3 weeks. And I went to the Senate, gave talks to the people at the Congress, spoke at the State Department, went to the Chicago Tribune, like American Enterprise Institute, Brookings Institute. Like I was 24. And like this happened to me, that like, and they paid for my trip. They paid me like $70 a day in addition to paying for everything. And I was there for 3 weeks, went to Memphis, went to the Elvis's house. Like this incredible thing happened to me, that the US government paid for my trip for 3 weeks because I was studying politics in Scotland, and they were interested in hearing my thoughts on having just come from Iran, on the way that this was after September 11, 3 years after September 11, and they were considering bombing Iran. And I was like, no, don't do it. It doesn't help. Look what happened to Iraq. So like they wanted to talk to young Iranians who were studying politics to get their feedback and understanding of what's going on in the region, and what's the general sense of how people feel about things. And so I got invited to America, and I went to New York for like 4 or 5 days. I was in New York, and they paid for everything, and I had this incredible experience, just like I had imagined. Like somebody else paid for me to go. And the other thing, I always used to think that I want to be in a position where like people fly me around the world, so that because they want what's in my mind. And the reason why was that my dad said, I told my dad, he was like, what are you going to do with your life? I said, I want to be a philosopher. I was like, no philosopher can make money. How are you going to live, right? And I was like, no, I want to be a philosopher, and people are going to pay for my thoughts. and that happened. Like
that's so great.
Like now I get flown to, like I was flown to Japan to give a talk for 8 minutes. For 4 days, like business class travel to Japan, best hotel, everything paid for, to talk for 8 minutes. And like, yeah, it can happen.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. Yep. Well, I've
So
had
I guess
similar.
this is the opposite of giving up power.
That's right. Well, we are so much more powerful than we think. I've had, people say to me, well, how you always seem to have things come your way. You're always in the right place at the right time. And I feel like, well, I expect that. And I had a similar experience with my apartment. I remember visualizing, I wanted a view, a fireplace, a balcony, and in San Francisco, I wanted a car and a place to park it. And so, about a few years later, I found I had written that out on a piece of paper, and I found that in my house that has a balcony, a view, a fireplace, and yeah, more than I even
Amazing.
expected. And the similar about traveling. So I remember sitting down in my 20s saying, I want a job where I'm flown all over the world. I want to work 2 to 3 days a week and train people on some type of personal development or communication. And I had a job like that for 14 years before I left just last year. So,
Amazing.
yeah.
And you liked it? You enjoyed it?
Oh my gosh. Talk about, to
Really?
your point, not 8 minutes, but it's funny. In Japan, I would go, they had a 3-day manager training, and I had a 45-minute section on communication. And I remember one time, so I would fly out for that. And I remember one time flying back the next day, and the flight crew was the same. And they said,
Oh.
what are you doing here? Because it was less than 24 hour, whatever. It was about a day later. And they said, and they were on their way back. And they said, boy, you must be pretty important to have be flown out just for that. And I was laughing, thinking that's exactly what I want to do, to be flying around, going to all these really wonderful countries in the world. And it's been quite fascinating. Yeah.
That's
So
fascinating.
I relate to what you're saying.
Would you say that maybe one of the ways that we give up power, I keep adding to your numbers, is
That's fine.
by not giving ourselves the permission to think big? Because I'm
Yes.
so passionate about encouraging women to think big.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm
Absolutely.
like, I always say, let me show you a picture of where I grew up. Anybody seeing that picture, like, you'll be like, oh, you can't, like, everybody reacts to it. It's on my LinkedIn. I've written an article, and I've got the picture in there. I'm like, look, this is where I grew up. Look at this house. Look at what it looks like. Look at what I'm wearing. Look at everything, and look where I am now. How did that happen, right? Like, where that picture was taken when I was like 5 years old. Less than 20 years later, I was being flown to America by the US State Department.
That's so inspiring. That's so
Yeah.
inspiring. Oh
And
my
how
God.
did that happen? And of course, even when I was in Iran, I was working for the United Nations, for European embassies. I was earning dollars while everybody else was earning rial. That's why I was able to save a lot of money, come here, pay for my own education. I've always supported my parents. No, nobody supported me. I always supported them. So I always made money. I made money even before that. I was always very entrepreneurial. When I was 17, I was working as a VIP tour guide, and these tourists, they would buy expensive Persian rugs, and I was getting big commissions on them, getting tips in pounds and dollars, etc. And saved all of that money, and then came here and paid for my education. So everything is possible, right? So, but what happened? If I could code, and the reason why I'm so interested in talking to you is trying to decode what I did, and I've tried to decode it to some degree. But I think that sometimes you do things. I didn't necessarily think that what I was doing. It's in retrospect that you find those things, right? But listening to people like you, like, I never thought in terms of, okay, 7 ways that women give up power. But when I listened to you, I could see all of those ways that either it has happened to me and I have overcome them, or somehow it didn't happen to me. Like this fake it to make it till you make it. I don't really think I suffered too much from um, imposter syndrome. I always believe that I deserve it. I will get it. I will do it. I can do it. You know, and I'm like gonna give it everything I can. It's fun. You know, the way I see it more like I see life like in business. I see it more like an Olympic athlete. You know, that's the analogy. So when people tell me, look, I haven't watched a single Netflix series or movie or TV series, anything for 2 years. 2 years. I haven't watched any. I have had no entertainment for 2 years. And when people tell me why, I'm like an Olympic athlete, but in business. I'm really focused on building what I'm building, and I want to make it a huge success.
That is so cool.
Right. And because when people tell you, oh, you don't have work-life balance, I'm like, well, would you say that to an Olympic athlete that is practicing?
Wow.
That's the level of concentration that you need to have, focus that you need to have. You can't afford any slip. One slip and you're out of the game. If you want to be, look at, and actually it's even harder than that, because if you look at the top tier of business and technology, the world is run by 10 corporations, you know, 5 in China, 5 in America. So in China, you have Alibaba, Baidu, Xiaomi, Huawei, Tencent. In America, you have Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, and Microsoft. 10 corporations. You could add Tesla. You know, I wouldn't say that I wouldn't put it in the same category, but you know, he is the richest man in the world. So let's say a handful, right? And they are all founded and run by men. What does it take to add another 10 that are founded and run by women?
Yeah.
It takes the same level of focus, energy, dedication, all of those things. And it's much harder for women because, you know, we are the child rearing sex. So I decided not to have children. To make all of the necessary sacrifices. And also I am aware, going back to probability, I'm aware of the fact that having come from Iran, I've lost a lot of time. So I need to make up from that time for that time. You know, I didn't become a British citizen until 2015. So I always say my life didn't start until 2015. I've only like lived for 5-6 years. There's so many things I couldn't have done until I became a British citizen, because Iranian passport is like the worst passport you can have. You can't do anything with it. It's like, you know, I think after North Korea, Iran is like next one up there. Right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think that maybe we've become like not we, because I wouldn't count myself, but Western people. Do you think Western people have become too soft? Do you think that maybe lack of, like, you know, I wonder if a little bit of adversity is a good thing.
Oh, for sure. I wasn't sure what you meant. I was going to ask you how you define soft.
Because yeah, I mean, like there's not, because I just don't feel there's enough hunger.
Yeah, I'd say that for sure. I mean, boy, it's hard to say as a whole population, but what I can say is that adversity, hardship can certainly help character rise to the surface. You find out really quickly who people are when things happen that are challenging, or they come from situations, you know, like yours is probably an unthinkable situation, or where you came from to where you are now. And I think that we, in general, in the Western world, we have it really easy. I mean, you know, so much so that there's that whole colloquial phrase called first world problems. People say things like that, you know, oh, I couldn't get the spa appointment I wanted, first world problems, or, you know, that's even a little extreme. But thinking about all these things that we're so privileged, and we don't hardly ever realize it. And even in my 20s, I was in a performing group for 4 years, and I lived with host families for 4 years. and 25 people from 25 different countries. There were 150 of us. And it was fascinating at a young age to learn so much about all these other cultures. And then I've done missions trips in third world countries, and it's so powerful to see what other people live like compared to us. Particular, I mean, obviously I'm speaking more from someone who did grow up in the US as a white person, privileged for sure. I mean, we were definitely middle class, but let's face it, the US middle class
is very different too.
very different. I mean, again, I almost feel like I'm not even qualified to talk.
And it's not even just monetary. For example, when I was 17, I was forced to marry my cousin, and then he was like, I'm gonna lock you up until your hair is as white as your teeth. But actually, I've noticed that I've got a few white hairs coming out, and I am not locked up.
Oh my gosh, how did you get out of that?
Yeah, with difficulty. Like that's why kind of the whole relationship. Let me tell you something really funny. So, my relatives, even my aunties, they think that I'm still married to my second, because after that one, I got out of that, and then my parents put pressure on me to get married again, because they didn't want to have a young divorce at home, and I did, and then I kind of disappeared from the face of the earth. They know that I left Iran, but they think I left with my with that husband because I divorced him too. Right?
When did that happen? How old were you when you divorced him?
22.
Oh, wow. And then 2 years later, you were
1 year later I left. Yeah, basically.
okay.
Yeah. So I married the second one. So the first one, the actual marriage didn't happen. It was like a kind of engagement that they have in Iran. So, and I got out of that very quickly, but that through the whole relationship between my mother and her sister, because he's my first cousin. Like, because imagine having to marry your first cousin, like, you're supposed to be like brother and sister, and it's a very, very complicated situation. And then so I got out of that, and he was like, I'm gonna lock you up until your hair is as white as your teeth. And he was only 4 months older than me, so imagine a 17-year-old boy saying that, right? And got out of that, then the second one, and now everybody still thinks so. I don't talk to my parents very often, but when I do occasionally talk to them, my mom is like, yeah, your auntie is here, she says hi, and she says hi to your husband. I'm like, yeah, thank you, husband says everything is great.
Oh
thank God they don't speak English. But if somebody who does speak English and listens to this and tells them, and I always tell my mom, why don't you tell them the truth? I really don't want to be living this lie. I don't care. And she's like, I care. It's like our reputation. Wow. So my parents are technically ashamed of me still.
Oh.
And all of my family still think that I'm married. And I'm like,
wow. I'm sorry.
So I think those. Oh no, it doesn't matter. I laugh about it now.
I mean, that's terrible.
I always think that when one day I write my memoirs, my autobiography, I'm gonna write it as a comedy, because it's so honestly, because it's so dramatic that you really don't want to. When I first came to the UK, there was a really kind agent who wanted to help me write my memoirs, and I couldn't write it. It was too painful. I couldn't write it. He's now passed away. Toby Edie, he was a very big agent in the UK, and I never wrote it. And I was like, you know what, I probably need to wait until I'm 50 so that I have healed from all of those things and put it aside and like gain my success, etc. And when I do write it, I'm going to write it as a comedy, because it's just hideous. It's just hideous. Like, honestly, it's a joke. You can't believe it.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, what a great conversation. I feel like I interview people and I talk more myself.
It's all good. No, it's wonderful to connect with you.
So okay, just to recap before you go. So you said about I want people to take something away from this. So women give up really in 7 ways you mentioned. Undervalue themselves, they're hesitant to self-promote, they
Mhm.
always accommodate other people.
Mhm.
They need to learn to say that no is a complete sentence, and I'm
Yes.
really gonna do something with this. I really love it. And credit you, of course. And then they speak tentatively. Um, then they give away too much detail, and in the process they lose people. They use minimizing words. And have I missed something?
No, that's good. That's it. Well, and I was going to say, I don't know how much time we have left, if
Very
anything,
good.
but I'm wondering if we could walk through each and I can give a tip for each one
Yeah,
of them.
let's do that. Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So would you be so kind? Okay. The first one, undervaluing yourself. So my antidote to that is to trust your gut and speak up for yourself. And that's easier said than done, but really figuring out what is it that you want and getting in touch with your needs so that you can articulate those or at least share your opinion. So that's part of the holding back. So we look to other people maybe as more authority figures or thinking that they're more important for us. So we've got to stop asking for permission and say what we think. And then what was the next one, if I can ask you to say them?
Sure. So the other one was hesitant to self-promote.
Oh, yeah. So for this one, thinking about self-promotion, not as, oh, look at me, because most people are afraid that they're going to come across as arrogant or that they're bragging. And if we just think about this as making ourselves visible so that people know who we are and what our gifts are, because we all have a story to tell. We all have gifts to offer the world. And so if we can remember that we're actually doing people a service by simply letting people know that we've got the skills for whatever it is. Yeah.
That's interesting. I actually have an example of that. Yesterday, I was talking to our client about, she was like, oh, how's things going? And then I said that, oh yeah, and I have an interview with me coming out in Forbes this week. And she was like, what? Why? What? Like, why? Like, I was like, yeah, just like, like I
Oh
really
my
downplayed it,
gosh.
and I really downplayed it. And she was like, why are you like that? I was like, I just don't want to talk about it.
Oh my gosh.
You
Such a
know,
good example
and
of
we
just
are right,
letting
like
people know
really,
because,
because I was worried about coming across as being bragging. So I
oh
was,
my
so
gosh.
when I was mentioning, I literally, like, I could notice that my body posture was like this, like, I
Oh
have an interview
yes.
coming out with Forbes this
Oh
week.
my gosh.
You know.
I mean, that's a whole other thing too about how our posture goes down. Like when we use minimizing language, like when we say, I just wanted to ask you a question, or could I interrupt? And we do this hunch thing and make ourselves smaller as opposed to, I want to offer a tip versus I just want to offer a little tip. It's such a difference.
But can I give you an example of when I haven't done that? Like with the investor the lady that I was talking to you about, she asked me, so who's helping you with marketing? And I said, well, I'm the marketing expert because I've got, I've worked with Steinway, I've been in LinkedIn Top Voice 3 years in a row, I've done all of these different things. And then she said, okay, then, so it sounds like you don't need me. And like, she just abruptly ended the conversation. So I was like, you asked me a question and I tried to show you that I
Oh,
have the credibility, right? And
interesting.
things like that, it's occasionally it backfires. So I think it's almost like women and people expect us to minimize ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
Well, and then, yeah, and then
it
maybe
becomes
she
a
was
vicious
feeling,
cycle.
yeah, and then she might have been feeling insecure of, oh, she doesn't need me. And then maybe she got smaller. I mean, I don't know the context, but I certainly feel like no matter what, we've got to be really clear on what we want
Yeah.
and what are we asking for and knowing the
Okay.
situation. Yeah. Okay. What
Yeah.
else?
Okay. Then we had speak tentatively.
Oh,
Basically.
yes. So making sure that you're speaking from that wonderful muscle called the diaphragm. I too have a singing background, and really being able to speak with projection. So I think about volume, just to keep it simple, speak louder and speak with statements declaratively rather than tentatively or questioning yourself when it's supposed to be a statement. Yeah.
Amazing. And then you said about they give too much details.
Oh, yes. Get to the point quickly. Think before you speak. And this goes back to what you were saying before, Somi, about pausing.
Yes.
Pause, think about what is the point, and then state the lead of your story up front. So it should be one phrase, here's what I want to say, as opposed to going through all these details and getting on tangents. And as a recovering rambler, I also like to tell people that I've taught myself, if I notice myself rambling, it's not too late. You can stop and say,
be quiet.
My point is this. Yes, you pause. Yeah. My point is this, or let me get back to the point. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So posture you mentioned as well, right? So that's one of the things.
We could call that one. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like, what's the appropriate?
Yeah. Thinking about Amy Cuddy is the person who came up with the phrase power poses. So if anybody hasn't watched her TED Talk, I would do that. But yeah, just having your shoulders back and making yourself bigger. So not being afraid to project even with your gestures, even on Zoom, you don't want to be in the camera, but using your gestures, putting those hands or the shoulders back and making yourself bigger is going to make you feel more confident. And if you feel more confident, you're going to come across more confident as well.
Yeah, exactly. I do one little tip for Zoom is.
You mean one tip, right? Not one little tip.
Oh, yes, you're right. Yes, you're right. Oh, thank you. Thanks for calling that one out. Yeah, amazing. One tip for Zoom is that I find that if I'm giving an important presentation, if you have a sit-stand desk, I stand. Because when you stand, it helps your posture, but also it helps you get to the point faster and clear because you're standing on your feet, right? So I do find that standing helps.
Yes,
so that's a good
such a good tip. Very, very good. Yeah.
If you
it's
have
so true. I used to work with a client that they called them stand-up meetings. And the intent was that people would stand and they would go faster.
Yes. Great. Yeah. That's a great place to end the conversation.
Okay.
Thank you so much for being here
You're
today.
welcome.
It's been amazing.
You.
So much fun.
It has been really fun.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Karen Laos. Be sure to check out her LinkedIn and follow her on social media. You can also join Karen's sessions on FemPeak. She's always one of my favorites. If you enjoy this podcast, please consider subscribing on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, or any other one of your favorite podcast channels. And don't forget to give it a 5-star rating and write a review. Our team works extremely hard to bring these interviews to you, and your support will help more people discover the content. Finally, if you're not yet a member of FemPeak, head over to fempeak.ai, register, and join a community that actively supports women's professional growth.